There's a lot going on, but what have we learned about Jim Comey from his book and the interviews he's done about the book? Well, maybe the most shocking fact of all is how banal he is. Comey ran the most powerful law enforcement agency in America. He was a central player in the last presidential election and in its aftermath ever since. You'd think you'd be impressed when he speaks, even if you don't agree with him. But no. Jim Comey is as conventional as they come. We know that now. His interviews sound like Chelsea Clinton doing a Q&A with Us Weekly. Comey says his literary hero is, brace yourself, Atticus Finch, because apparently he couldn't think of anything more cliched than that. You couldn't either. He says he wishes Trump would read the New York Times op-ed page. He recommended Sheryl Sandberg's lean in to his staff at the FBI, seriously, and he says he'd like to have Sandberg to a dinner party, and so on and on. This is America's top G-man, or was? He sounds like every other sensitive, guilt-ridden, middle-aged suburban liberal. Not impressive at all. Maybe that's why Comey did not hesitate before destroying any remaining public trust in the FBI in order to sell this book. FBI directors are not supposed to let emotion and political considerations influence government investigations, but Comey doesn't even hide it. He admits his behavior in the fall of 2016 may have been colored by his desire to make Hillary Clinton, quote, a legitimate president. So that settles that. There's now nobody in either party, Republican or Democrat, who will ever again think the Clinton investigation was conducted fairly. Thanks, Jim Comey. Or the Russia investigation, for that matter. Here's what Comey told ABC about that. Watch.
Did you tell him that the Steele dossier had been financed by his political opponents?
No, I didn't even think I used the term Steele dossier. I just talked about additional material.
But did he have a right to know that?
That had been financed by his political opponents? I don't know the answer to that. It wasn't necessary for my goal, which was to alert him that we had this information.
Telling the truth, says Jim Comey, quote, wasn't necessary for my goal. Apparently it wasn't. Whatever else you think about Donald Trump or his administration or whatever, you ought to be happy that that guy, Jim Comey, is no longer running the FBI. Alan Dershowitz is a lawyer and professor emeritus at Harvard Law School, as well as author of Trumped Up, How Criminalization of Political Differences Endangers Democracy. We spoke to him just a minute ago. Professor, do the things that Comey has said and written since he left the FBI confirm the decision to fire him from the FBI?
No, it should have been done much, much earlier. It should have been done on the day of the inauguration, and it should have reflected itself in the fact that nobody should ever have appointed him to be head of the FBI. This is a man who is revenge-driven, who is prepared to leak through a law professor at Columbia, who is prepared to disclose confidential conversations he had with the president-elect and the president of the United States. He's exactly the wrong person to have headed the most important law enforcement agency in the United States. This sends a horrible message to FBI agents and law enforcement people about leaking and about confidences and about trying to keep emotion out of law enforcement and politics out of law enforcement. To me, the worst part of it is when he both compares the president to a mob boss, which proves my point of Trumped Up, that you can create crimes out of almost anything and call a mob boss somebody who's running the presidency of the United States. And the fact that he is willing to say on television that it's possible that the president was with prostitutes in a hotel room with, urination and all that. He's the head of the FBI. He knows the truth. He has seen all the secrets. And for him to start speculating on that kind of nonsense and rubbish, and not to disclose when he spoke to the president, as you said, that this information was paid for by a political opponent. I used to have a good feeling about Comey. I met him a few times when he was in Boston. I now have only very strong negative feelings about him, and he just enhances the suspicion that I think so many Americans now have of law enforcement. And we ought to be trusting law enforcement, and nobody today would trust Comey with secrets or confidences.
So if he were alleging that the president were acting like a mob boss, calling hits out on people committing crimes, that'd be one thing. But he's in effect criticizing the way the president talks. He's from Queens. He does actually sound like a mob boss sometimes because he's from that part of the country.
Hey, I'm from Brooklyn. Hey,
exactly.
Come on, right.
There you go. No, but that's the point, kind of. Should law enforcement officials be making comments like this at all. I mean, doesn't it detracts from the entire organization that they purportedly represent? And,
you know, the idea of revealing these secrets, it's not 30 years later when he's writing for history the way Henry Kissinger has done and others have done. This is a gossipy, revenge, make money quick, get even, hurt your political opponents, raise questions about the politicization of the Justice Department and the FBI. It's the worst possible book at the worst possible time for the worst possible reasons. You know, we hear a lot about corrupt motives that can't make a presidential act into a crime. But talk about Comey's motives. Have anybody asked him about his motives, why he wrote this book? Why does he feel it's important for the American public to hear about information that he has no idea whether it's truthful or not? It's really scandalous and shameful, and I'm so disappointed with him.
So he has a lot of friends in the FBI, and we know that because the emails between them were FOIA'd, and now we have access to them. Shouldn't it make us nervous because he is now a political figure? He's chosen to become one. What about, you know, Americans who like Trump? Should they be worried about getting equal treatment from FBI officials who are sympathetic to Jim Comey?
Well, you know, the problem is, of course, it's not a problem. FBI agents are human. Law enforcement people are human. There are pro-Trump people in the FBI. There are anti-Trump people. They all take an oath not to allow politics or personal views to get in the way of their job. And here we see the former director letting his political and personal, I don't think they're partisan views, they're get-even views, get in the way of their job. And when you combine that with the Strzok disclosures, when you combine that with some of the other disclosures, it may serve a good purpose because it tells us the FBI agents are not what we see in stereotypes in the movies. They're real human beings with passions, but we have to figure out a way of making it so clear that these civil servants who sacrifice their lives have to keep their politics at home and their passions at home and their personal views at home. And this just moves the conversation in the wrong direction.
I agree. And it makes a lot of people paranoid for good reason. Professor, thank you for coming on. Great to see you.
All right. Well, of course, Syria is the most important story of the morning, Sean. But while you're here, I want to get your take. As you know, there is a book coming out early this next week. James Comey has a lot of nuggets that we've read, a lot of them personal, about his feelings about President Trump. But in one of those nuggets that I was reading, he takes a hit at the PR team and their focus so much on Russia and making sure that the public didn't see it as Russian collusion, that there wasn't a focus on how we handle it moving forward. I'll read this to you. It says the president-elect and his team shifted immediately into a strategy session about messaging on Russia. The Trump team, led by Priebus, Spicer, and Trump, jumping in, debated how to position these findings for maximum political advantage. Your reaction?
Well, that's just not accurate. And both Comey's description there in the book is misleading, and then CNN's reporting are entirely inaccurate at what happened. That meeting was long and robust. People like Tom Bossert, Mike Flynn, the vice president, asked a series of questions throughout that briefing to the intel team, which included 2 Obama political appointees that were there to talk about it. And as you recall, there was a bit of tension going in because of a lot of the leaks. So as the meeting wrapped up, Director Comey said to the president, "Can I speak with you privately and share something with you?" The president got up. They moved to the back of the room with Director Comey. The rest of us walked out of the room to give them the room. At that time, we compared notes. We knew there was a massive media audience downstairs waiting for reaction. We asked them, we shared with them what we were going to say, and we asked them how they were going to characterize the meeting. We wanted to make sure that we were aligned and that we didn't cross any classification issues or anything that was inappropriate. And that was simply the nature of this. There had been some tension clearly leading up to that because of some concerns that Obama appointees and the intelligence community were leaking information, and we wanted to make sure that we're all on the same page coming out of that meeting. But it was Director Comey who actually got up and said, "Can I speak with you privately?" CNN later reported that the president was shown a 2-page document which laid out a bunch of these. That's entirely false. It never happened. In fact, Director Comey himself confirms that. So the CNN reporting about that meeting is both false as well as Director Comey's misleading comments about the nature of that meeting. But the idea that we weren't going to have some kind of idea of touching gloves and saying, is it okay if we say the following? There's obviously a ton of media interest in this meeting. Would have been malpractice had we not done that.
Was there a concern and was there an effort at that time by your team and the administration to make sure that there were steps being taken, that Russia didn't continue to do this in elections to come? Can you hit back at some of those claims by James Comey?
Well, remember, I mean, this is important. So there are 4 people that came up to brief us. 2 of them, the CIA director and the director of national intelligence, were Obama appointees. They were both being replaced by Trump appointees. So the idea, our goal at that point, was to get a briefing on the report that was being issued that next day by those folks. Not to create a strategy. They were coming up to merely brief us. We had our incoming team there, whether it was Mike Flynn at the National Security Advisor, Tom Bossert, the Homeland Security Advisor, Director Mike Pompeo, who was the designee for the CIA, Vice President Mike Pence was there, a member of the National Security Council. The idea wasn't to create a strategy. They came up very clearly to come in and brief us. They were briefing both President-elect Trump and President Obama. It wasn't a strategy meeting. That was not the intent of the meeting by their admission themselves. So the idea that we would have some kind of follow-on strategy meeting on Russia is ridiculous. That wasn't the point of it. And the idea that we would have a follow-on meeting with appointees from the Obama administration that were on their way out is further ridiculous. What our team talked about afterwards, I'm not going to divulge, but I will say that on its face, what Director Comey described doesn't even make sense as far as what the purpose of the meeting was. At the end of that meeting, yes, we did describe, after Director Comey had asked the president to step aside, what we wanted to compare our statement. That was it. The idea was some kind of strategy session is hardly accurate.
Well, we'll all get our hands on that book soon. We'd love to have you back as more comes out. I mean, you were there. You were behind the scenes.
Right.
You got the information.
It's
Sean
great
Spicer.
to get your perspective, Sean.
Thanks for your time. We appreciate it.
Thank you so much.